Can I just say, Steph, that during that recording for this episode that the listener is about to hear, I have never been more self-conscious of my facial expressions.
Why?
Because this episode is one of our community members, Louise, who's come on to tell her recovery story. And Louise wants to remain anonymous, so she didn't want her video recorded. So anybody who's watching this on YouTube, it's just going to have almost a whole episode of just our listening faces.
I didn't even think about it. And I'm glad I didn't. Because my listening face is quite...
Yeah, it's quite stern sometimes.
Yeah, stern. I've noticed that
sometimes
on YouTube.
It looks like you're just mad.
So mad.
Yeah, you just look mad at what you're hearing.
Yeah, I do. I don't know how to fix that.
So for those of you watching on YouTube, obviously Steph and I, we're talking during this episode as well, but when we're listening to Louise, you will only be seeing us. Those of you listening on the podcast, it's going to be an easy experience. That's a weird way to put it. I don't know what that means. It's going to be fine. It's going to be nothing different, is what I'm trying to say.
I don't even think we need to let anyone know what other than trigger warnings. Louise does mention a couple of times in the past when she's describing her dieting days, she describes some calorie counts that she used to have. So there is some mention of diets in specific numbers. And also we will be talking about sex. Her sexual exploration, so to speak, is also something that you might want to shield little ears from if they're nearby.
Yeah, it's a raunchy episode. So
it's so raunchy. You know us.
We're all about the raunch.
All right. Hope you enjoy.
Well, it's been a hot minute since we've done one of these, Steph.
Yeah, it has. Like maybe over a year.
Yeah, we've only done one of these once with Nicole, who is a member of our community. And I think at the time we got some really good feedback about people hearing Nicole's recovery story. And so at the time we were thinking, yeah, we're going to do loads more of those, right?
Yeah. And then we just kept talking.
Yeah, exactly. And we're like, we don't want to share this airtime with anybody, except that we are today, because we are joined by Louise, who is one of our community members. Steph and I know some of Louise's story. We don't know all of it, but the bits we've seen, we said to each other, we need to get Louise on the podcast.
Yes.
So hi, Louise. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, we're sharing stories, right? So without further ado, can you share with our listeners a little bit about how you got here?
Okay, so I guess I'll just generalize like a big period of my life, which is probably like from teenage life up until maybe 30s. I'm 36 now. I was always a very restrictor type person. When I was restricting, I always had this idea that I had to have this same body for the rest of my life. Like it was the law. If I put on weight, I had to lose that weight and I had to go back to that body size again and again. So I would describe what I had as disordered eating. And I basically went through weight cycling for probably 10 to 15 years, like a long time, where I would just lose the weight, put the weight back on, lose the weight. And then as you've described in the podcast before, you know, it's like the pendulum swing of then dieting harder. And I used to do things like 500 calorie diets. I used to do juice diets. I used to do all kinds of fad diets and crazes that I thought would keep me at this certain weight. And then every time I would put on a bit more weight and then the struggle would be harder again and again. So
and that's a classic pattern.
Yeah.
Diet. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, when I listen to the podcast and the stuff on the community, I see a lot about emotional eating. And strangely enough, I'd never really had a problem with emotional eating. Like it was more like a goal orientated thing that was there's probably something deeper there. But my mum dieted for a lot of her life as well and struggled with her weight. And I think there was a lot of a message of, you know, being fat is bad and you should never be that. And so that was probably what was going on with me. So it was more like, I need to keep this body. And that is how my life is going to be. So I pretty much did that until the pandemic. And then the pandemic, something sort of happened where it was almost like I reached my peak of extremeness. And I think it was the fact that I could control everything. You know, we were indoors. I didn't have to see friends or go to restaurants or anything like that. So I ended up calorie counting every single thing and like weighing every single thing. And I was, oh, finally, it's, you know, it's all under my control. And I can get to my goal weight that I haven't been able to get to for years now, finally. And I did actually get to that goal weight. And obviously, like, I still was a bit like, oh, maybe I should be a bit more toned. I should be a bit more this and a bit more that. And, you know, it was never like quite perfect, you know.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I hear from different people in different experiences that like especially in the difference between like somebody who might say, I feel like I was a disordered eater versus had an eating disorder. The amount of distress might be different. So did you feel at that time, or at any time from adolescence onward, that you were under a great amount of distress trying to keep your weight? Or was it kind of something that was just part of your life?
I think it was just part of my life. I just thought that that's how life was and that's how you should live. And a lot of my friends were living under the same sort of philosophy, I guess, which is our generation and diet culture and all that kind of thing. So I think it was just sort of that was how life is. And I didn't feel distressed about it at the time. But then it got to a peak where I realized like this is controlling my day-to-day thoughts too much. Like thinking about food all the time, thinking about what's my next meal going to be? What's my meal plan going to be? How many calories is in this? Can I go for a meal out this week? I'm going to have to say no to these friends because I don't want to eat too much. And it's that kind of thing where it started to, I realized it was like impacting my social life, and I'm an extrovert and I feel like that was really affecting me. Yeah. So in the pandemic, I started the calorie counting overdrive, but I kind of, I'd sort of changed a little bit in that I started, there was a lot of time scrolling online during the pandemic. And on Instagram, I started to see sort of two lots of things. First of all, I was following all of these calorie counting accounts. And so my feed was just that all the time. How can you make a brownie for 50 calories? How can you do this? And like all these hacks and this kind of thing, right? But then on the other side, I started to see messages, and actually it was Steph's stuff on Instagram that probably like was a big piece of this puzzle, actually, because I started to see some posts from you and similar content creators that would be actually, do you need to be doing this? And I don't know, just these little seeds of doubt I started to have of like, should I really be cutting out pasta all the time? Is ice cream really that bad? These kind of things, because I'd always been very strict about these foods are bad. And then during the pandemic, it started to be, okay, I'm actually calorie counting and I can eat whatever I want. So that for me was like a big release of like, I can eat whatever I want, but it has to be within this certain amount of calories, or it has to be like one meal a day. I did quite a lot of a 1 meal a day thing where I could eat whatever I wanted. And I thought, this is so freeing. I can eat whatever I want. And then at some point, basically during the pandemic, my friend kind of suddenly went a bit crazy at me, and she kind of, not physically shook me, but I feel like she shook me. She didn't in real life, but she just sort of exploded, and she was like, all you talk about is calories. Like, that's all you're talking about. Do you realize that? Do you realize how bad you're making me feel for like how I look about my body? Like, do you feel like everyone has to be the same size as you? And I was thinking, oh my God, I literally never thought this would affect other people and this would affect my friends. I thought this was my little thing that I do. And, as I said, some of my friends were also doing it, but I think that really woke me up, and I was like, what am I doing? This is a bit ridiculous.
You had an intervention.
Yeah, I did an intervention. And then I think that all of these things, like I said, Steph's posts, that confrontation, it all started to unravel, I think, at that point. And I think I just realized, and I think you've mentioned this again before, that there's a certain point where you just get fed up. Like, you just realize I can't do this anymore for the rest of my life. And that the fear of putting on weight is the thing that really stops you. I think when you're a restrictor, is that once you stop all of this, you're going to have to put on weight and get used to it. And that just seems absolutely impossible. But then I did it. So 2021, I decided there was a certain point. I was living abroad for a few months, and when I came back, I was like, right, no more diets ever again. That is it. Never, ever, ever. And I'm never going to weigh myself again.
Was that a moment that you can pinpoint? At that very moment I said that, or was that more like a short period of time where you came to this sort of dawning realization?
I mean, it's a good question. It's hard to tell in retrospect, isn't it? But it was something that was building for a while. But I think because I had that transition of like, I was coming back from my time working abroad, it was like a good moment to be like, right, this is when I'm stopping. Well, I guess you're actually familiar with that when you diet a lot, right? You're like, okay, this day I'm going to do this.
It's like the mirror image.
It's like the reverse, yeah. So it's like, okay, I'm going to stop on this day.
Well, it's like a time of change. And if you're always thinking about dieting, diet is going to be part of that change. So it kind of felt like there only was an either or option. Either you're going to go back to your pattern of dieting, something in you was saying, no, there'd been enough kind of chink away at that. Yeah, exactly. Chinks in the armor. It was like that. Like it was slowly breaking down all of these ideas and opening my mind to this idea of, okay, actually don't want to do this anymore.
And
Can I ask a question about that too?
yeah,
I resonate with that. And I've talked about that myself in that there's this build of these ideas starting to occur and plant these seeds of doubt for a while. And then there's this life change or some impetus for, okay, here's the day. But I want to highlight just to listeners that oftentimes we are learning, maybe listening to podcasts or reading posts that suggest these things to us, but we're not making any changes on the outside. We're just kind of ingesting the information, but actually changing isn't necessarily happening. I think there is that period of ingestion, of learning, and that often, for me too, precedes the action.
definitely. Like it has to sort of sink in over time. And sometimes it's at a really subconscious level. I was starting to listen to podcasts in the pandemic, and it wasn't this one yet. I think that was after, I don't even remember when he started. But I listened to another podcast that was an anti-diet podcast, and I found it a bit too extreme, actually. I was a bit too like, oh, yeah, but how could you actually do this? It just didn't seem tangible, it didn't seem like a thing that could actually happen. Feasible, sorry. It didn't seem feasible. Because I think you go through this stage, which I think you mentioned before, which is like, you've got all of that information in your head, but it's almost like you think, oh, I'll just lose some weight first and then I'll do it. Like Sarah said before, you start treating intuitive eating as a diet first, and you think, oh, I'll use it to lose some weight. And then it's only when you've really got rid of that notion of, I need to lose weight, that's when you can like fully dive in, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So there's this like in-between period where you're kind of half in it, and it just seems like a ridiculous concept to not do what you're doing. So I stopped doing everything. And then that's when I started listening to your podcast, I think, and other podcasts, reading lots about it. I started tailoring my feed on Instagram to like anti-diet stuff. And then it was almost like a full throttle recovery. Right, let's nail this now. I did have one-on-one therapy as well with an intuitive eating therapist. And that was really important for me in learning things about like getting in touch with my hunger and fullness cues, learning about body image and that kind of thing. Like those were all really instrumental sessions. And I don't know if that was just me, the way I wanted to do it, that I wanted to do it almost like a classroom type. I need to go through every point and I need to hit every point and be thorough about this. I can't just have these ideas in my head and not actually do the proper homework kind of thing. Yeah. And then I guess, I don't know, I'd say I've been recovered for maybe 2 years now, or a year and a half, fully, in a way that I would just, obviously you're never fully recovered. You've always got something going on there. But as in like, I feel very safe around food. I feel good about my body most of the time, Yeah.
What was that process like for you, Louise? You made the decision to, but then what was it actually like? What were you learning when you were not dieting anymore?
I learned that, the world didn't stop turning and it wasn't anywhere near as important as I thought it was, and that my friends still wanted to be friends with me and my boyfriend still wanted to be with me at the time. We'll talk about it later. That's another story for a bit later on in this. And that people really didn't care about what you looked like, and you were still you, and life was just so much easier to not have to think about food all the time. And all that planning and all that brain space that you get back, not thinking about it all the time, is just a relief.
And how was that for you from a body image perspective?
I think there were definitely like different waves to it in terms of the biggest question that I had always, and I think I even asked this in the community a few times, was, when am I going to stop putting weight on? Like, will that ever happen? And I think that is the scariest part, and that really takes time to see through. It's been 3 years since I stopped dieting, and there was definitely a point, probably last year even, when, my body's sort of settled now, and now it's maintenance weight, I would say. So there were phases of like putting on weight and like noticing, and then being like, okay, I'm going to have to get a new clothes size now. And then that would be okay for a bit. And then again, with this, the summer, winter seasons in England, you've got to get all your winter stuff out, try all that on. Does that all still fit? No. Okay, well, I'll get a load of new stuff now. And I'm very privileged that I have the money to do that.
Was that distressing?
Yes. Yeah, I think that was probably one of the worst parts of recovery, to be honest, is the like, oh God, I've got to go and get a whole new wardrobe of stuff I don't really want. I like the clothes I've got. I've always wanted to fit into these clothes, and that was part of my thing of like, I just don't want to buy new clothes. I just want to fit in these clothes forever. And then, so it was like, I think every time I went up a clothes size, that was frustrating. You know, you've wasted money. You've got to go to the changing room to try everything on again. You don't know what your style is. And eventually now, for the past year, everything has kind of stayed the same. And I'm like, wow, I've actually made it. I made it through.
Yeah. And you're talking years, which I think is really important, because it's funny listening to you speak of it now. It's very matter of fact because it's in retrospect.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, yeah, this happened and that was frustrating. And then I did the thing and I got the clothes and now it feels better. But like
Yeah.
in the moment, to your point that you use the community at several times to sort of work that through, because we don't know that it ends here, you know, or and for everybody it's different, but we don't have the foresight, you know, in a year's time or 2 years' time, it will feel much different. And I'll be able to speak about it in this matter of fact way. You don't have that. So you're trying to navigate those emotions and uncertainties. And I think it's inspirational just listening to you talk about it from this vantage point, because there's a lot of people I'm sure listening who are in that space right now of
absolutely, yeah,
that's exactly what I'm thinking. Those are the things I'm thinking right now.
And definitely, like you said before, you know, you can put on weight, you can lose weight. It really depends, like, where you're coming from and what your eating issues are, right? And as I said, personally, I was a restrictor, so I put on weight. But it's different for everyone, isn't it? But also, like, you know, listening to you say in the podcast stuff like, you know, it takes 2 years or something for your body to trust you again, of your metabolism to settle and that kind of thing. Like, that is definitely true. I feel like, you know, you hear all this stuff, this mystic thing, or maybe it's going to happen to me, maybe it isn't, and it confirmed.
Can we segue a little bit into relationship? Because you did mention that you were in a relationship at that time.
Yes.
So you were with somebody as you recovered. Is that correct?
Yes. So I was with the same partner. We met just before the lockdown, actually. So we met like early 2020, and then we broke up last year in the summer. Yeah, so I was with him pretty much that whole recovery time.
Yeah.
And I think that really helped as well at the time. I mean, obviously everybody's in different situations, but I was very lucky the fact that I had a partner who was like, oh no, but you're gorgeous and, you know, you look good. And he actually said some things like, oh, I actually prefer you a bit now. Like, you know, I was like, what? You know, it's really hard to wrap your head around how other people perceive you in terms of attraction. And I think I was just really confused by it. But also, you know, luckily very supported. And if I had like a bad body image day, I would phone him and I'd be like, can you just tell me some things about how nice I look? And he's like, yeah, you look great. You know, I think you're really attractive and all this. So the problem is that obviously then we broke up last year. And I think I was just a bit nervous. And I mentioned it on the community call once that I didn't know how this was going to be, this new chapter of like me being single and putting myself out there. And, you know, I like traveling a lot. I'm a bit of a backpacker. So I was worried about these trips that I was going on over the winter, which have happened now. You know, how would I be perceived by the other sex, and how was it going to go? And with this new body, like, was it going to be a hit or not?
Yeah.
That sounds weird, but turns out, guys, it was a hit. So
and this was the story that prompted this invitation, because I remember that call and I remember you telling, like, reporting back on that and feeling like, I remember the empowerment in your in the whole thing. It was like there was a lot of energy behind you going out. And did you go you went somewhere, right? And it was like you were like, I have it, guys. Like, it was awesome.
Yeah, it turns out the guys love it. I don't know. I think it's very interesting because I don't consider myself very conventionally attractive, or like I've never really thought, you know, I'm really that attractive or anything like that. And I think what I've learned in the past few months in my newfound sexploration, we're calling it, is that men like women's bodies. It doesn't matter what size they are, to be honest. And again, you know, I have to do a disclaimer. I would describe myself as having a mid-sized body. I don't know about the experience of having a plus-size body or bigger body, so I can't speak for anyone in that situation. Also, you know, I'm straight, so I only have this experience as well with being attracted to men and men being attracted to me, so I'm just going to put that out there. But it turns out that actually the key things are confidence and directness, and I think part of my approach has been, since I've been single, and kind of, I mean, it's also relevant, the fact that, like, I'm not looking for another relationship at this point yet. So I'm kind of in this weird sweet spot where I just want to have sex and I don't really actually need the person and I to have a real deep personality connection. But actually, I think this, if you'd like to refer to me as your roving reporter in terms of, sexploration, I'd say that actually, yes, this is actually all based on physical attraction, pretty much all of these interactions that I've had. And that sometimes that's even harder in a way, because when you're insecure about your body and you're worried about how people are going to perceive you, like that's the rawest form of it. Like, do they want to get intimate with you? And most of my approach has just been, and everybody finds this hilarious, but it works. If I see a guy I think he's really hot, I just have a quick conversation with him and I just say, do you want to have sex?
The directness.
Success rate so far, I'm not gonna lie.
I was just about to say, how have you dealt with any rejection that's come along, but there hasn't been any?
Well, actually, that's a lie. The first guy that I asked, the very first one, he rejected me, which was, pretty crushing, because I was like, oh God, this is what it's going to be like now. But it turned out we ended up traveling together for a few days. He actually has a very different type of woman, and it's not me. And so we can talk about types as well. Be interesting to discuss, because I think as well, I didn't realize that, you can have like 10 different types of somebody that you're into, and some people are into certain features and some aren't. We've been kind of a bit brainwashed to think, okay, well, the generic thing that all men want is a small body and perfect this and perfect that. Actually, I think I was really surprised when a lot of the guys that I got with, that makes it sound like there's a lot. There's not lots, it's not, let's put it out there. It's okay if there is, but there's not. But the way that this is the most interesting thing, the way they've described the things that they really find attractive about me. I've heard all sorts of things like, I like your soft skin. It's like, what? That's a thing? Okay. I really like it when you wear boots. I like girls that wear leather skirts. It's your eyes. Being in a mid-sized body, I guess, the fact that like when I've been with some of these guys, some of them have like felt my belly, and that's always like been the feature that I've been the most insecure about my whole life, and I think why would anyone want to touch that? That would have been my previous thought, but now I understand, like, guys are into it. And some guys, it's just, I've been talking about this with a friend recently, and we said, look, in our friendship group, there's like, I've got like quite a cool group of girlfriends. We're all very different looking. Like we're a very big spectrum of people, I guess. And I think I have to remind myself, they all have and have had men attracted to them. So there must be a similar spectrum of men out there that are all liking different things about different people. Like, it is not about a certain feature, a certain body, a certain thing,
What I'm picking up from you that I think is really important, especially when you were talking about types and you were saying, you had met the first guy, right? And he had rejected you. And then you found out that he just had different type preferences. And then you learned that, some people just have different types. And I don't get a sense that you take that personally.
No, it's not about taking it personally at all, because I mean, in this specific situation, he was actually talking about a kind of a skin color type, so obviously, I'm me, I'm not going to be a different color. So, I was like, well, fair enough. But I think that is the thing. You realize that you attract certain people attract you, and it's not you're attractive or unattractive. It's different people attracted to different people. And there's someone for everyone. And actually, to be honest, I've literally got with the hottest guys I've ever got with in my life. I don't know how I've done it. It's just a bit of sometimes I'm a bit disbelief, because I wouldn't, when I was younger, say my smaller body in disordered eating, I would have not believed that at all. I would have thought, how is that possible? But actually, it's about confidence and about the fact that I'm sort of free of all of that noise these days, and that I'm older and more mature and more experienced, and I'm just like, right, do you want it or not? Let's go.
I don't have time to waste.
Louise? Sorry, how old are you, Louise?
I'm 36.
36. Okay.
Yeah.
And so when you come out of this 3.5 year relationship, and you've gone through this recovery process, and so your body is different and your body feels different. When you start this exploration, what was it like right in the beginning to be in this unfamiliar body, perhaps? The first time you have sex, when you come out of this relationship.
Yeah.
And your body is different than it was before you'd got into this long-term relationship. So you're sleeping with a new person in a new body? Like, how was your self-consciousness level?
Yeah. I think I mean, the first time was in a car. So, and it was at night. So it wasn't really much to see. But I was surprised that the guy was like, the guy made a sort of a point of telling me like, oh, I don't really like skinny girls, actually. I'm much more into girls of your body type. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's the first time I'd kind of really heard some guy say that to me. Because obviously, why would they say it to me when I was younger and smaller? And then after that, I think, I kind of was so on the buzz of like the fact that like this was almost a challenge now. I could try it with certain guys and see if it works. And it seemed to be working every time. And I kept saying to myself that, what have I got to lose? They might reject me, or so what? I'll just find someone else. And I think I realized that if you've got to a stage where somebody's, you're in bed with someone, or, you're going to be intimate with someone, you're there now. It's there's no point hiding what you look like. They can see what you look like. It doesn't matter. I've realized that it doesn't matter. It's about confidence. Yeah, it's about being like, okay, well, this is me. Here I am. And
would you say that you're a pretty embodied person?
What do you mean? What does
like
that mean?
You have this way of almost like you're not getting in your own head. You're not living up here and like this, like you're just that you're in your body. You're just
that's true. Actually, I think I'm a very logical person. I'm less of an emotional person. I'm definitely more of a logical person. I'm very sort of like, matter of fact about stuff, I guess.
Yeah. Which actually sounds more in your head.
Yeah,
yeah,
but I don't know. I actually think that's not true. I think that when you can think that way, you go to your head and then you work it through and then you leave. You're able to then enter your body, because some of us go up here and it just like cycles. You get stuck there. But this ability to sort of be like, I can now be here, because this isn't keeping you from being present.
Yeah, I think like if in terms of obviously as time went by and I was like trying it with these guys and say like on dating apps and stuff, and I was getting the feedback and the success and this kind of positive reinforcement, I kind of thought, well, this is what works, like logically, like this is how it works. Like if I don't think too much about it, then it's okay. Yeah.
Well, sex is a very embodied act. You can't say.
Yeah, you got to be.
This exploration is exploring the embodiment piece. It's like you're somebody, you say, it sounds like this is a personality trait of yours, that you see yourself as someone who's quite logical. And so when it no longer made sense for you to continue dieting, that decision seemed quite clear. Was there any wavering for you after you decided to give up dieting? How often did it happen when you were tempted to go back and go, oh, no, this isn't worth it, or not?
Definitely, like for the first year or so, there was, and actually it's probably still now, but it gets less and less and less. I've had times where it's almost like a primal instinct to diet. It's like, okay, well, I need to diet, oh, this doesn't fit anymore. Or there was some wavering in terms of, I can see the path ahead and I'm walking towards that path and everything is good and I'm progressing and I'm on track. And obviously it's not linear, so you waver back and forth. But I definitely had a lot of times where it was almost like something would lurch up in your head, like, okay, you need to diet. And then you'd have to have a little talk with yourself and be like, no, actually, that's not really going to help. And it's not going to, it's almost like having that two sides to yourself and talking yourself down and being like, no, I don't really think that's the solution here. We're doing quite well. Everything seems to be going okay. And with body image as well, obviously everybody has bad body image days, and I definitely have them as well. And I'm noticing as well, because I went off the pill last year, that there's a lot of relation to the cycle. In certain parts of the month, you look in the mirror and you think, oh God. And in certain parts of the mirror, you think, let's text that guy and ask him to have sex with you. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, that's so true.
But yeah, it's definitely not like straightforward. It's definitely is having to constantly keep your eye on the prize almost, and just keep marching towards what you have to believe is going to help you in the long term.
How much do you think about, like, how much brain space does recovery even take up for you anymore?
I think it's again, like, it's sort of diminished over time. Like, I think for a long time, and you had a whole podcast episode about this, I think, which is like you can get a bit activisty for a while and you can actually become obsessed with intuitive eating, or you can be obsessed with this new way of life because it's so novel and it's like quite liberating, and it's all you think about and it's all you read about, and it's it becomes a bit of a thing that replaces your obsession with dieting almost
Right.
for a while. And then once you kind of like practiced the tools of getting in touch with your hunger and fullness cues and that kind of thing, and it becomes more natural, it definitely, everything just sort of slots into place, and you kind of just eat what you want to eat and don't overthink it. And I think especially now, I've noticed, even like particularly in the past year, like I just don't really care what I eat anymore. And even for the first 2 years, it was this, obviously the permission sort of phase where you're really excited about, oh, I can eat whatever I want, and there's lots of these little micro scenarios that come up, you know, oh, maybe when I'm going on holiday to this place and I have this certain food that I wasn't really allowed before, or when I do this. And now I've gone through all of those scenarios. It takes a long time. Now I just don't really care what I eat. I've kind of like lost my interest in food, which I don't know if it's a good or bad thing really, but it's just not there
Doing
anymore.
other things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Which does make me think about the episode we've got about turning anti-diet into an identity.
Yeah.
111, if anyone's interested.
Exactly. But that's a phase, I think. You sort of come out of that in the end.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I think a lot of people do stay in it, and I think it's okay if that's working for them. Then absolutely.
Yeah, of course. And I'm wanting to. The thing is that I am a bit of I read this book about this once. A maven, which is like somebody who really likes to spread the message about cool things that I found or like stuff that's happened. And I feel like whenever I do hear people talking about dieting, or people who are still in that deep in diet culture, I really am trying so hard to resist to say something, to be like, oh, have you heard about this thing, intuitive eating? But then I know that a lot of people can't really hear it. Like they're not ready to hear it.
Although someone did it for you, okay, they didn't necessarily say about intuitive eating, but they gave you the intervention, that little shake. So in those situations, I think just saying a bit about ourselves. So I don't, in those situations, I don't offer people, I say, oh, what about this or what about that? I'll just say, for me, yeah, I used to feel like that, and now this is what I do, and it's changed everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And then people don't feel defensive, because you're not trying to push something on them. You're just offering something as well. Yeah. But I love that your friend just lost her shit in the end and was just like, no.
Stop talking about calories.
The other thing that tickled me, I was just jump back to earlier, was when you said all this calorie counting stuff was coming up on your Instagram, but then Steph's content, I'm sort of imagining Steph's content kind of like clawing its way through all this calorie counting stuff on the algorithms to get onto your feed.
They're also intervening.
Basically, it's great.
Good to know. So I guess to sort of leave any listeners, and I can appreciate maybe you don't even think about it like this, because again, maybe part of your logical brain just, it seems quite straightforward. But for those who are still struggling with food and or body confidence, what are the things that help you the most, or did help you the most, or the most helpful either tools or concepts?
Okay. So I think probably there's like 3 main things that I learned in my one-to-one therapy that have stuck with me, amongst lots of other things, obviously. One of them was the hunger to fullness scale of 0 to 10, and being able to see on the scale where I was throughout the day. Number 2 was when we talked about body image, and she asked me to describe some of my friends and their traits and whatever. And I would describe, so-and-so is intelligent and funny and blah, blah. And then she'd be like, okay, well, how come you didn't mention their weight, or, how big their belly was or whatever? And I'm like, oh, I guess I didn't think about that. It's not who I think of them as, that person, And so that was a real light bulb moment for me. And the third one, what was the third one? Oh, the third one was I did an exercise where I had to write a bit of a food diary, actually, which I think is something you can't really do until some of the very latter stages of recovery, because that might have been a bit triggering earlier on to write down all my food. But when she went through what I'd eaten throughout the week, and she was like, there was foods on there that I would have considered like processed, fun foods, that kind of thing, that had no nutrition. And I kind of felt a bit like, oh, well, on this day I don't really eat the right things. And she's like, okay, but yeah, that cereal actually has vitamins in it. It's fortified with vitamins. The milk that you had, the oat milk would have had calcium, and the brownie that you had would have had egg in it. And there's I think that morality can still be there with food, even in the later stages, and then you realize that everything has nutritional value.
Dallas Nutritional Counseling is a social media account on Instagram. I don't know if they exist on other platforms, but they have a series where they'll put a food out that's typically associated with being bad. And this morning I saw one, and it was like a hamburger. And then they point to each component of the food, like the bun, the meat, the lettuce, the ketchup, whatever. And they say, like, this has this, this has this, this has this. And they deconstruct food in terms of its nourishment and its nourishment proper, just straightforwardly. They're not saying it's awesome. They're just saying it has these things.
Yeah.
Just see it in a more neutral way. That's Dallas Nutritional Counsel. I am not a spokesman or an affiliate.
Good plug. I don't think I've heard of them. But
Just something to throw in there as well. While I've got two therapists on the line, dissect this. So in terms of like my type of men that I go for, right, I have this very particular type usually. I've deviated from that since, and I've realized actually, you can find lots of different things attractive. But in general, what I always believed and what I still half believe, I'm really attracted to skinny men. Why? Is that a diet hangover thing that it's some sort of body image thing, or is it a control thing, a music scene thing where, I like guys who are like with tattoos and piercings and a bit skinny stoners? What's the deal?
so when you said why, my brain just went, well, why not? Also, you mentioned coming off the contraceptive pill, and
Yes.
that can change women's tastes. There's research on that it can change the type of men they're attracted to. It's extraordinary. And I think sometimes our tastes change in life. I really could try and make it mean something deeper, but I don't necessarily think that it does, especially because it being more about an aesthetic thing. If you were going to say the type of men, like I used to go for this type of personality and now I go for this type of personality, then I might think there might be a few more thoughts coming to mind. But you said you were worried it was a hangover from dieting days. So do you think that there's something in that?
I just think it's a bit sort of hypocritical and ironic that, I could talk about like, oh, I'm in a different body and I can get with these guys. But actually, I find it really attractive when guys are really skinny. That's like a double standard, isn't it?
Well, not even, because really skinny probably isn't this like societal ideal now. Like, guys are kind of being held up against this certain physique, which isn't super skinny.
Yeah, true. It's not conventional, like what everyone goes for, I guess. You'd assume. Yeah. And actually, since I've been experimenting, there is a guy that I've been getting with, and he has like a larger body and a bit of a rugby player body, but, not sculpted or anything like that, And he's really sexy because he's really confident and he's really like just takes the lead and he just goes for it. And I just didn't think that I would be into that. And it turns out that, like I said earlier, there's a lot of things that you can find attractive and people can find attractive in you. And it is not always like, oh, this is my type and this is the only person I'm going to ever want to get with.
That's important. Even like to flip it, right? Earlier we were talking about how it's helpful to think about how the I don't say the other sex, because for some of us it might not be, but how other people would be attracted, can be attracted to multiple types of people, but also same as us, like we can too, and also exploring that and understanding how we can also feel like I tend to gravitate towards this type, but I actually can see that this opposing type could also be sexy to me, and like to be able to understand how that works from this side of the fence. And also you could say, just to be devil's advocate a little bit, like if you had said, I only seem to gravitate towards bigger guys, you could also make the argument that in and of itself also an attachment to anti-diet or like recovery culture, like defensiveness. You know what I mean?
What it's making me think of, Louise, is like permission to eat what you want. Sometimes when people start giving themselves permission to eat, they're like, oh, that thing that I thought I really liked, I don't like so much. And now I like this other thing because I've been practicing removing this idea of there's something that I should want or I should desire. I can really hear that. And so maybe that's part of this self-discovery or sexploration journey that you're on, is really finding out what you like.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very good. Yeah.
This might not make it to the podcast because I have a feeling it might be like a contentious thing to say. But also sometimes when I think about liking skinny versus bigger, that there's sometimes a component of some people who like bigger guys like to feel protected. They like to feel enveloped. They like to feel the safety of being like, held, and just the difference of body size with the way that feels physically, You know what I mean? Not the aesthetic of it, so to speak, but just the felt sense of someone being bigger or smaller than us can lend itself to different ways of feeling inside ourselves that might also have to do with something.
That's interesting, because when Louise mentioned about the rugby guy who was bigger, kind of taking charge and stuff like that, and I didn't think I'd be into that, but I did like it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay. Well, anything else before I wrap up?
Well, how do you two feel about the whole attraction in recovery, if you want to share? I mean, Steph, you've been married for a while.
Yeah,
so.
I don't have a choice.
Yeah.
I'm not experimenting with what other people, but Mike has, is also, and I'm lucky that he's been extremely supportive of the whole thing and has absolutely, like, he doesn't have this idea of what a woman should look like being this, waif or something like that. Like, he's very much like, I love your body. And when you said men just like women's bodies, that is my husband. And that has been so helpful for me. So it was hard for me to gain weight and to feel self-conscious, but I think it was more about me and myself than it was about a risk of him rejecting me, because I never felt that way. And my own attraction outward runs the gamut.
And I think I need to go on my own exploration to find out.
Hey.
I think I'm due one. Maybe you've inspired me, Louise. Teach me this directness of which you speak. I couldn't imagine, like, genuinely couldn't imagine.
What have you got to lose?
I genuinely have such an aversion to sleeping with a stranger.
Well, that's
like,
fair
everything
enough,
in me
yeah.
just goes like, oh, like, I don't want a stranger's hands on me.
I think it is a bit like I've had this discussion with a lot of people since I've been going through this exploration. Like, a lot of people, more than you think, and a lot more men than you think, also have said that they need like a bit more of a connection over a few days at least, before they jump into bed with someone. And I'm like, I quite like the idea of like being, maybe it's in the place that I'm at the moment. I don't want almost the risk of any romantic, stuff to happen. I just want it to be like, right, you and me, pure physical.
Yeah.
Interesting that word risk, because I guess for me, it feels a lot about safety. I don't know. I feel like I would need a certain trust in somebody.
Yeah, I think like I've learned with dating apps as well that, it is a bit of a woman's game in terms of there's a lot of men out there who are looking for people for hookups or whatever. And that usually is a bit annoying for women, who are looking for a romantic connection to filter out these guys. But when you're a woman who just wants the hookup, you've got the cream of the crop there. You can you could basically go for any of them. And I just never really realized that. And when I've talked to some male friends, they've confirmed that if you're a woman and you want to hook up, you could choose anyone.
Yeah.
It's really empowering.
Empowering new lens on
who
being
knew?
female. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for coming and sharing all of this. Appreciate your share and your inspiration.
Yeah. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you for having me.
Join the community. Meet Louise.